Olá e bem-vindo ao meu canal de YouTube. And note that I said canal as in waterway, not as in channel of YouTube. And we'll get back to that more in a minute. But hello, I am currently learning European Portuguese, that is mainland Portugal Portuguese, and it has been a delightful experience. I really love it. I love the language. I love coming to it as an English learner, knowing a very complicated and confusing and weird language that is also beautiful for being confusing and weird and hard to learn. English is like this beautiful putty you can play with and do all kinds of things with it. But as a native speaker, I have all these advantages having grown up speaking it really, really well. I pity anyone that has to learn English. Um, but yeah, and if you're anything like me, which of course you are, you spent a lot of time over your life learning little bits and pieces of languages, right? So maybe you speak some French, some Spanish, a little bit of Italian. You speak just a little bit of these languages to the point where you can understand it. You can at least tell when someone is speaking that language. It's kind of fun. You can sort of interact with people a little bit here and there in those languages, but you hit a wall, right? You hit this point where you just can't go any further, or you stumble if something gets misunderstood, or you have that moment like I did at a restaurant in Canada where they come to you and speak in that language and you are ready. You prepared your whole life for someone to look at you and say, "You speak my language. I'm going to try this." And then you blank in that moment, and then they switch to English, and you just lose the moment for them. I had this moment in French Canada years ago where I had this a waiter came up and asked me what I wanted in French, and I was like, I've prepared for this forever. I don't remember any of the words. And then that waiter immediately switched to English. And that was the only chance we had on that entire trip to do the French. And I was so embarrassed. But also, on the positive point, there's that really exciting moment when you're learning a language where you learn some phrases, you learn some words, you learn a little bit here and there, and you're learning very, very quickly because you're learning just little pieces of things. And then you get to that precipice, you get to that huge moment where you realize that this isn't just a couple words and phrases that are going to help me get from A to B on my vacation. This is a language. This has literature. This has history. This has dialects and accents. This has people all over the world. Where as an English speaker, I can really sit and appreciate and chuckle a little bit at like Deep in West versus Scottish English. Whereas I would love to get to that point in any other language where you recognize the dialects. You can kind of play with that. You can discuss the literature. You can make dad jokes and puns in that language. So that's my motivation here. That's kind of what I'm looking at. And again, kind of what I really want to focus on here is as an English speaker, the tools that I found most useful, the pitfalls that I found the most difficult, and just kind of the process I've gone through to get to that precipice, to get to this point where it is a language, it is this broad, rich, expansive experience that I'm about to go into. And now I'm going to talk quite a bit. I'm going to cover a lot of different things, including the promised most difficult, most important rule that you need for reading European Portuguese. We'll get to that. I'm very excited about it. But note that in this video, I'll have very detailed chapter markers where if you want to skip around and learn about something specific, you don't have to rewatch the intro. Okay, so we'll jump into it. I'm going to talk quite a bit about Portuguese as a language, a little bit about it, like the history of the language, and then I'm going to talk about the tools I've used to get to this point, some keywords and phrases, and then, of course, that really important piece about the most important thing to know when you're trying to learn Portuguese. Okay, so first off, we're going to do a quick little tour of why you should learn Portuguese. So I just learned this, but if you're looking at the top 10 most spoken languages in the entire world, Portuguese is number 8. It's in the top 10. It's comfortably in the top 10. It's actually in spitting distance of both Arabic and then even French. And it's really, really cool there, and actually Bengali too. We're talking millions of people, but still, that's quite close. Um, and that's very cool to know. And one of the cooler things that I thought of about that is Portugal is a fairly small country with a fairly small population. That means that the majority of Portuguese speakers are not in Portugal. They're all over the world. And that's really cool. Yeah, very global language. There are a lot of individual countries that speak it. Ooh, did I skip one? I did. I skipped the map. There's a lot of different international countries that speak it. And this has a depth of color here that shows how thoroughly the language is understood in country. So, of course, Brazil, Portugal, chunks of Southwest Africa, but this also shows the slightly darker and slightly lighter colors where there are significant populations of Portuguese speakers, or where you could be understood speaking Portuguese. And I was pretty surprised to see that Japan is on the map, but there is a pretty strong Japanese population here, so it's not totally surprising. Um, Yeah, so really cool language. And let's get back to here. But why learn it? And this is something that I hit too, is just it's always been my wife's favorite language, which is incentive by itself. But then also just it's such a cool language. And when I was growing up, I learned a lot of the classics. I learned a lot of like the classic literature is classically trained, I suppose you would say. Um, and I really love Latin, like old school historic, like filigreed bronze or like ornate iron, whatever. Latin, like the root of the Romance languages. It's clunky, it's awkward, it's weird compared to a lot of the more modern Romance languages, but it has this like cool root in our history. And you can see from those Latin roots how it feeds into multiple languages. And the moment that really clicked with that and Portuguese is when I was learning the basic words here, and I looked up my favorite color, red. It's this little word, just red. It's red, rojo. Yeah, it's red. But in Portuguese, it's vermelho. Like it still draws straight from the classic traditional Latin word vermilion. So vermelho is just this like artful presentation, this like very sculpted version of the word red. Um, and that really did it for me because I'm a giant weirdo. That was the big thing that made me decide, all right, this is it. So I'm going to learn Portuguese and I'm going to help you learn it too. And this article right here, I'm going to link to this as well. This is a really, really good article that's titled Why You Should Learn Portuguese Before You Learn Spanish. And I'll get to some FAQs in a minute here, but I did want to highlight that because it is funny because most people who are watching this are going to be English speakers who probably already speak a little bit of Spanish, even or speak Spanish fairly well. Um, and that's a much more common path to learning Portuguese. It's pretty rare, relatively speaking, number eight spoken language in the world, to learn Portuguese before learning Spanish. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So we'll get here. I looked up briefly, and this is an AI response, so take it with a grain of salt. It may not be true. Little trivia piece Celtic. Celtic was actually a language in the area before it became a Romance language area, which was crazy to me that there are Celtic ruins and Celtic historical roots in Portugal. That is super cool. Um, but yeah, just a little bit of history about the language. There's Roman history, there's Old Latin, this terrible term, vulgar Latin. So Latin was introduced to Portugal early on, and that's kind of the root of the language. But there's so much to it, right? Okay, and so let's skip that because there's a lot we could dig into the history. I'm not going to get too into that. Let's talk about the modern stuff and have some dancing Duolingo folks here. So we're going to do some really quick rapid fire kind of frequently asked questions. So we're talking a little bit about why to learn Portuguese. I probably glossed over that, but it's an incredible language. It's a beautiful language. It's this flowery, dramatic. We're going to go back to this. It's this flowery, dramatic language that is really, really cool to hear. And I keep thinking of it just as my own personal metaphor, like a table. And this feeds back to our frequently asked questions. I think of it like just a beautiful, sturdy, well built wooden table, right? And the table is Spanish. The structure, the build of it, the design, the phonetics, the language, a lot of the grammatical rules, they're Spanish. And that's why the comparison to Spanish comes up a lot because a lot of people think that you can get by in Portugal speaking just Spanish, and which, we'll get to that. But you think of that table as Spanish, like the shape is Spanish, the design is Spanish, the structure is Spanish, but the wood is French, which comes out and expresses itself in sort of surprising, strange ways. And then all throughout the outside of it, it's just this filigree, hand carved Italian artwork. And that really encapsulates sort of like the visual metaphor that I've been doing for Portuguese. It is very much structurally Spanish, very close analogous structures. Like it's pretty easy to look at different words, learn some of the vocabulary, and see, okay, there's Spanish here. But then there are things that pop up, especially conjugation of some verbs that drives my wife crazy because she's fluent in Spanish. But that can be a barrier because the way that Portuguese structures some words and sentences is very different from Spanish. So it's a lot more like French. And the example we have of that is like the conjugation of in. So M casa is in the house. That's like literally in the house. But on the Disney Channel, it'd say no Disney Channel. So M, no, na. These are all crossovers. And that kind of conjugation of that part of the sentence is something that's much more common in French, but doesn't happen so much in Spanish, as far as I know. And then, of course, Italian, there's a pacing, there's a flow, there's an energy to it, like a vibrance to it that I most associate with Italian. And I'm sure there's linguistic crossover as well. I just don't know Italian, so I can't speak to that as much. But yeah, table, French wood, Italian filigree on it. It's a very, very cool experiencing Portuguese from that old Latin background, knowing more Spanish now, speaking a fair amount of French from school, and then all of that tying together into this learning of Portuguese has made this a really exciting kind of magical moment. But let's go to those FAQs. This is a little bit all over the place. We're going to talk about your frequently asked questions when you're talking about going to Portugal. We're talking about visiting Portugal, maybe even visiting Brazil, but we'll focus on visiting mainland Portugal because Portugal's been in the public conversation a lot. It is becoming more and more popular as a place for people to visit and move to. And it is a beautiful, phenomenal place. And a lot of that you can kind of see expressed in the language. And that's been cool too, to actually be experiencing the culture on the ground while learning the words and language and how it's all structured together. But the frequently thing. So if you're planning a visit to Portugal, you probably will have heard that you can get by with just Spanish. That is technically true. If you're speaking Spanish, most people in Portugal can kind of understand what you're saying. But if you speak Portuguese to a Spanish speaker, it's very unlikely they'll be able to understand it. And that really struck me because that shows there is a point of crossover where it doesn't translate. And a lot of the fundamental basics like hello and sorry and excuse me and all of that is not Spanish. So that is something we're going to go through when I talk about those common words. But so can you get by with just Spanish? Maybe don't. And another thing too is that actually a huge number of people here speak English or understand English enough to get by. So you can speak English, and that also is really helpful here, especially if you're in Lisbon or one of the more central areas, because so many other travelers in this area also don't speak Portuguese or necessarily Spanish, but most everyone has a very basic rudimentary functional knowledge of English. So that's usually a better one to fall back on than Spanish. But if you know Spanish, that can help with some of the vocabulary. So my wife is able to look at a whole sentence or like a whole page of words and pick out some individual meanings and know what it means and kind of translate the whole. But it's different enough that that can actually be a hindrance instead of a feature. So can you get by with just Spanish? Kind of. Can you get by with just English? Mostly. I would say that if you don't speak Portuguese, if you don't speak actual Portuguese on any sort of functional level, you get about a third out of every experience you'll have in Portugal. It's not bad, but you're missing out on a lot. You're missing out on most of the experience. You're missing out on most of the interaction if you don't speak Portuguese. And that's my feeling and my experience, even speaking a very rudimentary Portuguese, where I barely function in Portuguese. But even what little I'm able to see beyond the base conversation, I can tell there's more there, a lot more there. And I'm picking up more, learning more, understanding a lot more, and being able to ask and understand a lot more about what's said than I was before. Just terrific. Um, do you need to speak Portuguese? We kind of covered that. No, you don't. Not necessarily. This got me, and this actually goes here too. So one of the other key things is Portuguese has multiple dialects, and I mentioned that. But the two biggest, most common ones are Brazilian Portuguese and mainland Portugal Portuguese. They are different. And one thing I want to be sure to highlight is I'm going to go ahead and jump in here and talk about the actual language learning tools, the tools that I really enjoy and have been really useful for learning Portuguese. One of the most useful tools for me was Duolingo. I'm going to go ahead and say that right out of the gate, but I'm also going to dunk on them a little bit because Duolingo only offers Brazilian Portuguese. And you can tell because of that flag there. That's the Brazilian flag, not the Portuguese flag. Um, and I went into this assuming that Brazilian Portuguese was more or less the same as Portugal Portuguese, was more or less interchangeable. And on some level, that's true. So my vocabulary actually grew very well because I was doing the Duolingo app, and I find it to be a really useful one. So I was able to get a lot of words in Portuguese early before the trip we took, and that's helped kind of with the move and continuing to learn the language. But this is going to come to our central point about the toughest part about being an English learner learning Portuguese. Um, they only teach Brazilian Portuguese. They don't teach mainland Portugal Portuguese. And I reached out to Duolingo's support to ask about that. And they sent me the sassiest answer. And I don't think it was intentionally sassy, but it really was, where I said, hey, I'm learning Portugal Portuguese. I'd love to have that as an option on Duolingo. And they said, we don't plan to offer that. And you know what? learning Brazilian Portuguese will actually give you a better foundation and better understanding in the long term of Portuguese as a language. I'm like, yes, that's very helpful. And learning to hang glide and skateboard at the same time will probably make me a better skateboarder and a better hang glider in 10 years. But in the short term, I'm going to have a lot more broken bones and really get in my own way. So you can support folks. What that was, swing and a miss. Now, what I found instead is Memrise. This is a free app, free website. It's a really, really good one that has video from native speakers, greatly structured lessons. This is great. So, in learning mainland Portugal Portuguese, this is where I went after Duolingo. And actually, the vocabulary I learned from Duolingo is very helpful here. But this really helped understand how the actual sounds of words are put together, how the actual sentences are put together. And it was much more intimidating. But like it says here, how people actually use the language on some degree, and we'll cover that too. But yes, so if you're looking to learn mainland Portugal Portuguese, I would start with Memrise. I found it very helpful. I found it very useful. It was really good. You can go ahead and do Duolingo, but be warned, it's going to be wrong. And why it's going to be wrong, I'll actually get back to that, is because of the single most important piece. When you get to that precipice I talked about, when you get to that point where it's not just a few words and phrases, it's an entire consistent language. The learning apps don't keep up. Unless you're on the learning apps all day, every day, they rely on repetition, introducing you to the same words and phrases over and over and over again. So it's actually very, very slow. It gets cemented well. So you learn a lot of those words and you actually remember them. The repetition is important for that. But in terms of going up to a sign or reading a menu, it will actually slow you down using the apps exclusively because they don't teach you that vocabulary fast enough. There's just no way to do that in a way that actually is structured in learning. So you need to be able to look at a word written down in Portuguese and be able to say it. This is where we run up against my new best friend slash frenemy slash nemesis, the letter S. And this is from practiceportuguese.com, which is an amazing website for this. Also, shout out to my brother for introducing me to this specific article. This was a lifesaver because, and let's actually jump around a bit. This article mentions that it almost sounds Slavic. So if you hear Portuguese spoken, you can kind of tell it's a Romance language, but it sounds like people are speaking Russian because of the S's and SH's and Z sounds. There's a very soft, like the word susurration comes to mind, the English susurration, that like sound of S's. It's like whispering, but it's like something else. It's very fluid, and that dramatic sound is that S. And the reason why is because every single plural has an S on the article and then the word itself. And also because you get a different kind of S sound on that too. But also because S's and Z's and X's can all also make an S sound. So if you throw that all together, it's dramatic. And that is also really important to highlight here. I'm going to jump around quite a bit here, but that S sound is not in Brazilian Portuguese. It's in Portugal Portuguese, not Brazilian Portuguese. That really can mess you up. So let's see, where were we? We were on 6, 8, tab 8. No, tab 9. Yes. So the letter S it's really important to say this because if you hear somebody speaking mainland Portugal Portuguese, you'll hear a lot of words end in an SH. So if it ends in an S, it ends in an SH. So if I'm looking at, let's see, I've got the word, oh man, think of an example. We'll just go through it here. But they've got S, Z, and C, and I really recommend reading the whole article. I'm just going to jump around to the individual examples. The key thing to remember is the only times, this is actually faster, the only times the letter S makes an S sound are if it's at the beginning of a word, or if it's in the middle of a word after a consonant, or if it's a double S. Those are 3 times. Beginning of the word, middle of the word after a consonant, or there's 2 S's together. So right here. So this is a funny one. Success is successo. Successo, excuse me. So that is successo, where the C makes an S sound. So you can already see, like, wait a minute, that's a lot of S's. So successo. Very smooth, very fast. You say bom sucesso, like good success. Or good luck, I think that actually means. And then concessao. And there you've got the hard C for the beginning, but then an S in the middle, and then an S for the double S. So that's S's in there. Sucesso, concessao. Then this is actually challenging because I haven't really learned my Z's that well, but it's des vezes des e igual a 100. And there you've got even the C isn't referenced, but it also has kind of an S sound, and that's it's a funny one.
10 vezes 10 é igual a 100. 10 vezes 10 é igual a 100.
And the audio is a little
10 vezes 10 é igual a 100.
same. Man, and hopefully you heard that. I think the computer audio is playing through this. So, but yeah, let's talk about the letter S. So there are three ways the letter S is pronounced. That S-E,
Se,
a Z-E,
Z, Sh.
commonly you're going to hear this as the SH sound because that's where it is. It becomes an SH, and we're going to look at this in a second. Anytime it's in the middle of the word. So a common example is, let's see, before a consonant. These are the S sounds when it actually is an S. That's pretty good. So beginning of the word, middle of the word after a consonant. So o sapo, sentido, sim, pensao, pensar. Those are all clear S sounds. The way we would look at an S in a word as English speakers is like, that's an S. That's what it does. Then the Z sound, it makes a Z if it's between vowels. So aza for wing, rosa for rose. And you don't actually roll the R. That's a bad habit. You can do that. Isolador for isolator. I don't know what the word isolator is, but sure. Peso for weight, and then riso for laughter. And this is important too, because the rule actually stands if it's between words as well. So this would be temos most of the time, but if the word following starts with a vowel, it becomes temos. So temos agua instead of temos caro. And fomos hoje also follows because the H is silent. So if in terms of the sounds, and that's a really tricky one, in terms of the sounds, that is a vowel following this S. So it's O-S-O. So it is said as if it's between vowels. So aza, rosa, isolador, peso, riso, temos agua, como hoje. Hope you're still with me. And then the most common sound you're going to hear a lot with the S, most common is strong, but you're going to hear it a lot, is the SH sound. And that's this one here. Before a consonant in the middle of a word. So the word castle looks like castle, but you'd say castella because the S in the middle is before a T. And don't remember if that's one of these examples. But like I said, before a consonant sound or at the end of a word. Isto, pescar, poste, barcos, and ares. Temos cerveja, and that one I mentioned because that's one where the following word, temos, is different based on what word follows. So if it's temos is we have, because it's nos, yeah. So that's we have. So temos cerveja, or temos agua is we have water, we have beer. And then the SH sound. Now, this is what really messed me up. So I was kind of grasping this, and when I freaked out and asked my brother about this question where he found this article to help, is I was looking at oh goodness, it was a ravioli box. It was a box of ravioli we were just cooking, and I was looking at this, and it had on it very clearly the serving sizes. And it was what looked to me like the word doses. It was DOSAS. DOSAS. And I looked at that and I was like, wait a minute. So S is usually an SH sound, right? So it's doshish. And then my wife and I were looking at each other, was like, is it doshish? And then she looked it up and looked up a audio recording of the sound, and she said, oh, it's dosish. And I just had an existential crisis right there because there was a Z. There was no S sound with two S's in the word, and it broke the rule I had already, and I didn't understand it. So I love this article, and it has helped immensely to understand these words. And as you start kind of playing with the words inside sentences, you absolutely understand why they're shaped this way. And it feels very much like the liaison in French, where you'll cut off vowels and connect words together. Which, yeah, that's where I'm talking about, like the wood, the French wood in the table expressing itself in unexpected ways. So let's see. There's also different versions of the sh sound, and this one gets very confusing. We'll see if the audio.
Postes.
Postes.
Postes. Postes.
And it sucks the audio is getting cut off, so we don't hear the postes. Estás. This is estás. Mesmo.
Mesmo. Mesmo.
It's actually the mesmo. The zh. The mesmo. Os livros. But oh man, it has been an adventure learning the language. And this was hugely important, right? So, and there's the double S just as an S sound. That's an S sound, easy one. You'll see that it's like that's an S. So impressionante, excuse me, and paseo and cesao. S's. And especially cesao is a good one because that is three whole S's and you get two actual S sounds, and it's unusual for that. And then Z is funny because zero, azera, cinzento, sejam felizes, feliz año novo, and Varzea. So those are the S sounds. Those are very Z. And that one actually feels very Spanish. Like, this is kind of the way I would expect to see a Z in Spanish. But then there's an SH sound here as well, where arroz is still kind of that SH sound. Feliz Natal. Like, it's still, yeah. So Feliz. So it does the same SH thing, but with the Z as well. And the letter C, just to make this complicated. So this is why it took me so much. So I will definitely have this article in the description of this video because this was incredibly helpful. So after this, I can look at any word written down and actually kind of figure it out. So certo, cinco, conceder, posilga. And then we got K, acama, acopo, acurto, o banco. And this, as an English speaker, is not that confusing. The letter C actually follows the same rules. If it's, what is it? If it's with a value, this is very typical, like, or a vowel, excuse me. This is something we would expect to see, like concede versus hunch. Comma, copo. This is the K sound like a Q. Yep, banco. That's not crazy. And then SH, this also is something we're very familiar with as English. So this was nowhere near as challenging. Like macho. Okay, macho is a little tougher, but chega. Like, we could see some things do that already in English. Tosha. Akomishao. But this is another case where you get the SH sound. So we now have three letters that'll give us kind of an SH sound. And there's another one. The C, o cabeza, is an S. O cosar is cosar, not o cosar. And then o perso. That's just a really, o perso. It just feels like such a sweet word. I love it that that's for cradle or birthplace. Yeah, and of course there are exceptions, but I'm not getting into that. Oh God, we're not getting into that. So that's the number one rule. The most important thing is remembering the Z, the S, and the SH sound in between your words. And I'm actually going to talk about some other phrases or sentences that I know very well. After this, we'll get to talk a little bit more about individual examples that we've learned. So we're back here and this is where I'm actually going to start talking about useful phrases, useful things that have come up, the things that have been most important that I have kind of learned and that have helped me, get to where I am now. So this right here is the sentence that I opened with. Hola y bem-vindo ao meu canal de YouTube. And this is canal as in channel. I cannot get Google Translate to translate the word channel. TV channel, radio channel, it all goes straight to canal, which cracks me up because it's definitely wrong. But I did listen to Hotel TV for a long time in one of our kind of weekend outings, and it says, it's talking about what's showing up next, and it's no Disney Channel, because we've got kids who are listening to a lot of Disney Channel. So no Disney Channel is just on the Disney Channel, and that it just says channel. So the word is just channel. So this is wrong, clearly. So while I have found Google Translate very useful, I use it on my phone. There are two things I really wanted to highlight. The first is you've got to watch out for translations like that are clearly wrong. And you'll start to recognize them fairly quickly. You're like, that's obviously not right. Because I know canal as like the root. It's clearly channel like English channel as opposed to TV channel. but that's okay. And then sometimes the audio tips are wrong as well. Let me see if I can catch this.
Olá e bem-vindo ao meu canal de YouTube.
It's okay. Except it still said canal. But let's talk about some other words and phrases. So another one that I really loved learning is so aprender a português. Excuse me, I said that wrong already. And spelling Portuguese is challenging. And this is wrong because so, and this also is, I wanted to be sure to highlight this because this is one of the most common jokes in Portuguese is when they're kind of talking about people who are learning Portuguese, is that so versus like I am a substance of my being versus estou aprender, which is I am currently in the state of. So it's the difference of being drunk, as in like currently I have had a lot of alcohol to drink before I sleep, versus being a drunk. Being drunk versus a drunk. And that's the difference between so I am, it is a part of who I am, versus estou. And I wanted to highlight that because this is so. And it says it's ESTOU, and there are very few languages out there would cut off the E and then do the SH. So estou a aprender a português. And that is I am learning Portuguese. This is such a wonderful phrase. If you get this down, you learn how to say this, and you speak to Portuguese people, like you're stumbling through words, and you say, estou a aprender a português. Super sweet. People just light up. It's one of those things that people love to hear. There are a ton of expats here, especially in Lisbon. There are a ton of travelers and tourists, a lot of people coming here and not bothering to learn Portuguese even a little bit. So being able to say a single phrase in like good local Portuguese, being able to say just a single thing goes a really long way. It's just really nice. It's a nice thing to be able to do anyway. Even if you're just visiting here, learn some phrases, go ahead and do this. But if you're planning to move here, spend a bunch of time here, this is huge. So let's go ahead and talk about some other words and phrases here. Another really another really fun one. I wanted to make sure to highlight so versus estou to talk about estou itself and talk about condensing the word, but then also to go ahead and talk about that key difference, that so versus so, drunk versus a drunk. Another one, this is one that trips me up a lot, especially early on, where it's a casa is the house, because a is the feminine form of the. Like in French, you've got le or la. In Spanish, you have, I'll get that later, but you've got that masculine, feminine article, and it's the. So a casa reads to me like a house, not the house, but it is the house. Versus uma casa is a house. And then if you want to do masculine, say carro. Carro is a car, but the masculine the is o carro. That's really handy. So if you see an O or an A, it usually means the versus or And so that's a really important one I wanted to highlight because I look at that and I'm like, a car? What? So that was really challenging to learn. And then also hearing it now, NAO, now with a squiggly over the A is no, just right here. And then sim is yes. Sim is yes. But the now, it really sounds like people are saying now, but it's no. Now is no. Let's see. This is another really handy one. And here I messed up the D article, and I'm glad the Translate caught that. And I also misspelled onde. And this is a really funny one too, because the D article, it's tricky to know which D to use because those also are conjugated and they change by gender. So it'd be like da banho, and there are, if you're ever unsure which to use, you can actually you can just kind of skip it, if that makes sense. So in this case, it's onde fica a casa de banho. Where is the house of bathroom? And you just say the duh there and soften that and go real fast, like de banho, like de baba. And you can say that really quickly, and you can get away with not knowing the do or the da or the de for a little bit in some sentences. But onde fica a casa de banho is just a really beautiful phrase for where is the bathroom. Is onde is where. Fica is find, and it means both the literal and metaphorical find. Is again the. And casa de baño is house of the bathroom, which is bathroom. Where do I find the bathroom? And there is the letter E, just without any accent. That's just E. That means and. If you do an accent over the top, little hash mark, it's E, which is. So I went to someone and said, onde é a baño? Where is the bathroom? Which is technically correct, but it's not what they say. So onde fica, where do I find, is the way you would say that, which is a very classic, like traditional way of using language. And I loved it when I found that out. So the onde fica, I will never forget. Where do I find? And again, this is a really handy one. So like E is and that's just the letter E. A with a hash mark on top is. And then K is what? That is very handy to know. Let's see a couple others. There's some fun ones that I'll go ahead and jump here as well. Oh, let's, hola without the H is hello. If you want to say sorry, say desculpe. Desculpe. And this is a very common one that comes up a lot. Portugal is a very kind and generous and very polite country, and people in general will use desculpa a lot. Another one too is, this is a cool one too. So there's com licença with the C. Com licença is with license, literally means with license, but it means excuse me. Most people will just say licença. Licença, just license, excuse me. That's just excuse. Very, very handy. Another one is going to be obrigado. My son struggles with this one. And this one is gendered, where men will say obrigado and women will say obrigada. Obrigado, obrigada. What we found in Lisbon especially is that some people will shorten that. And instead of saying obrigado or obrigada, they'll just say brigade. They'll skip the O and they'll change the vowel in the end to an E, say brigade. It's kind of like just thanks. Instead of thank you, thanks. Well, I'll get that wrong, of course. Brigade, not right. But it's a kind of a change of the word itself, which is really handy to know. And that also informs a lot of how you speak in your day-to-day speech. You don't use the longer phrases. So if somebody, let's see, what is this? See if I remember how to say this. This is something the language courses teach you to do. It's você. Prazer em conhecer você.
Prazer em conhecer você.
Didn't get the whole thing. Prazer em conhecer você. This means it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance. It's a pleasure to encounter you. So it's pleasure to encounter you. Nobody says that. Nobody says that. It's way too much. It's way too formal. You may run into this in like a job interview or a really formal introduction, but most people will just say prazer. So it's a pleasure to meet you. You just say pleasure. It's the quick way to do that. And you see that a lot. So a lot of these words and phrases are the smaller individual words. That's been really, really fun. Let's talk about some other kind of common phrases. So we said onde fica. A couple other things that people will commonly say is they will go ahead and it's a very common practice to answer a question with a question. So if someone says, if you're ordering food and you ask for a couple items on the menu, say you get this done in Portuguese, say like uma abatonado e café e uma cerveja. So a American coffee, abatonado, a café is a little espresso shot, and then a cerveja is a beer. You ask for those three, and then the person taking order may pause and then go tudo, which means all. Everything, all, tudo. And they'll look at you and say tudo. And the proper way to respond, like the local kind of natural way to respond, is to say tudo. Like with the same same word, but that inflection of the affirmative. Like, yes, that's everything. Thank you. Sim, tudo, or just tudo. It's also very common for someone to say the classic Spanish phrase, de nada, it was nothing, is kind of the you're welcome. So if you say thank you to someone, they may just say nada. It was nothing. It was nothing, but you say just nothing. It is such a sweet sounding phrase when you hear it said for the first time. They have this wonderful person like hold the door for you or like make sure you dropped it, like call out if you dropped your wallet or something. which I haven't done yet, which has been good. Just say, oh, obrigado. And I'll just say, nada. It's just, it's very warm and sweet, and I really, really love that turn of phrase. That's a really, really good one. Let's see. Trying to think of some other really important ones. So we did obrigado, we did desculpe. I know there are others, and I took some quick notes here. There are a few things I wanted to make sure to highlight, and some of them are a little bit more funny. So one thing that I really enjoyed is how do you think you would say shampoo in Portuguese? It turns out you just say shampoo, shampoo. But we just did the whole article on the way that different letters sound. It's an SH sound at the beginning of a word, so it's not an S. This cracked me up the first time I saw it written. I look at that and my brain breaks, and then I'm like, that says shampoo. I totally get this. And then you laugh. Then you have to laugh. So a quick note on the tools. I do want to make sure to highlight this is that when you're using Portugal, if you're doing the Google Translate, when you choose the individual language, note that there are two different forms of Portuguese. There's Portuguese Brazil and Portugal, or Portuguese Portugal. Usually it will default to Portuguese. So if you have a browser tab open that you keep going back to for the translation, it's going to say Portuguese, but when you refresh the page, it's going to change it from Portugal to Brazilian. And on the phone app in Chrome on my Android phone, it doesn't say Portuguese Brazil, it just says Portuguese. So that's the difference between the Chrome on a computer and Chrome on the phone. So whenever you refresh, make a note. Ooh, geez, I don't mean to do that. There we go. Take a second to check and make sure that you're using the language that you intended to use. That's been helpful. Okay, and a note on that. There's a huge population of Brazilian folks here in Portugal, and most folks do get by speaking Portuguese either way, just whatever accent they tend to use. And you're not going to get corrected on that. But you will have cases where it's going to be tough to understand, especially if you're learning the language and you're stumbling through it. If you're switching between the two dialects, that makes it much, much harder to learn. So if you're going to learn Brazilian Portuguese, you can just learn Brazilian Portuguese and stick to that. But that means that every time you learn a new word here in Portugal, you're going to have to double check yourself. Whereas the vice versa is also true. If you're learning just mainland Portugal Portuguese and you're in Brazil, you do need to double check the translation or the pronunciation of everything you get, just in case. And here are some examples that make it stand out really, really clearly whether someone is speaking Brazilian or Portugal Portuguese, and something that will really make sense. It makes it very clear. Yeah, so it makes it very clear right away, but then also these are really useful phrases. So, and this is interesting too, because this highlights the difference between the two. So bon dia is good day or good morning. So you say bon dia. The M is softened to almost an N. Bon dia. You say it really fast. You say it soft. It's not a bom dia. Bon dia. But that's Portugal Portuguese. In Brazilian Portuguese, this same line becomes bom dia. Oh, it's so rich. Oh, it takes its time. I'd love it. I'd love it. As much as I'm really enjoying mainland Portugal Portuguese, there are aspects of Brazilian Portuguese that I still like much, much more. But I wanted to highlight that the M is still an M, and you take the time to actually say it and feel the M. And the D becomes a G, like a rich, really like toothy G. So bom dia, Portugal Portuguese. Bom dia is the Brazilian Portuguese. And hopefully that's really clear here. We'll do another one too. But I did want to say that the S translation is not used in Brazilian Portuguese, but is used in the Portugal Portuguese. And that D to a G is a really strong sign that someone is speaking Brazilian Portuguese. And there's like a warmth and a richness and like a slowness to it that is so, so very satisfying. But another one is boa noite is good evening. Good evening. Boa noite. Say boa noite. Say bom dia early in the day. Boa noite actually at nighttime. And of course, there's boa tarde, which is good afternoon or good later. Literally means good later, but it translates to good afternoon. This is one I actually have not heard in Brazilian Portuguese, so I don't even know how you'd say this. But no, boa noite, which is interesting. Everyone's sleeping in the afternoon. So boa noite is just good night in Portugal Portuguese. In Brazilian Portuguese, that one's boa noite. It's so good. It's so good. The ch and the t sound just is a really, really incredibly satisfying way to say that word. And I'm struggling to remember another word that changes like that. But boa noite, bom dia, bom dia, boa noite. Ah, I love it. And I spent a lot of time practicing, like really getting my rich Brazilian accent down before we came here. And people looked at me like I was crazy because I kept switching off between the two accents and it really messed people up. So I had a decent vocabulary, I had a pretty good sentence structure. I understood a fair amount of speaking Portuguese, but because I was mixing dialects, it was very confusing. It would be like somebody saying, "Oh, don't you know ye can?" Jumping between like Midwestern English versus Scottish English, and they were two of the most dramatically different dialects, or even if they're common, even they're sort of understandable by themselves, out the window. No one understood what I was saying. Yeah, which highlights some of the differences between the two and the pitfalls too. So bon dia versus bom dia is one of the really easy ways to tell if someone has the Brazilian dialect or if they have the Portugal dialect. I also understand there's an island dialect that's one of the more common, larger ones that stands out, and a northern Portugal dialect as well, but they're much more subtle to the point where I haven't noticed them yet, and I haven't really seen the differences highlighted too much. Let's see if I'm missing anything else. Oh, I am. As a bonus, one of the reasons it was really important to learn to read Portuguese or to read Portuguese at all is because I wanted to take books and stories and actually read them to myself, read them out loud so I could hear what they sound like, so I could learn to spell and write these sentences and also just broaden my vocabulary. Huge shout out, hopefully this comes through, to Super Batata. Super Potato, this ridiculous comic book is absolutely delightful. And it's targeted towards 6 year olds, but it's got the limited dialogue. So, like, easy illustrations so you can kind of see what's going on. It's a spoof. So, it's a spoof on a superhero stuff. So, it's like a familiar topic, simple words, visual aids to tell what's going on. So, like this graphic novel thing, this is a really, really satisfying way to learn the language and learn to read it a little bit. And this one's particularly funny too. I got a really kick out of that. So, big shout out to Super Batata. For my next step after that, once I've gotten a better handle on this, I also have the first Harry Potter in Portuguese, which is probably not going to teach me as useful. Oh, Garda das Chaves. It's good. Look at that. Das Chaves. So, yeah. And there we have it. And I've just been enjoying this so much. I love just feeling the languages, feeling the changes and differences. And you probably saw me just light up with that bom dia and bom gia. Like, it's such a strong, they're both so positive. People say those all the time. People say good day, just sort of like a way, or good morning, just as a way to interact with each other. That's what you say to each other in passing. People say it all the time. And the difference in character and richness between the two is so satisfying. That Brazilian character and then that Portuguese character. So that is it. We'll leave it there for now. That was long. Hopefully this is useful. Hopefully this is fun. Just a super quick recap. At the very beginning, we talked about why to learn Portuguese. It's a beautiful, phenomenal, rich historical language that just feels good to speak. Um, it just feels good. Like as you're interacting with the language, as you're learning the words, as you're using the words, as you're conversing with other people, listening, speaking, it just sounds and feels good. Very satisfying. I've never experienced that before. Not in the same way. I like French. It's fun. It's sassy. You can really sass some people in French. I enjoy Spanish. It's a very, I hate to say practical, but it's kind of a practical language that's translatable. It's easy to figure out in Spanish. Um, yeah. And then I think I would like Italian. But Portuguese just has this ornate, sort of magnificent beauty to it. And I think you can get very sassy in Portuguese as well. And I'm really excited to learn that. There's a weekly trivia night near our place where we're going to go to every week and just listen in. Because that's some very advanced Portuguese, but then also there's a lot of really snarky humor in trivia nights that you see expressed very clearly in Portuguese that I want to kind of understand. The sooner I can make dad jokes, the sooner I'll be really comfortable in Portuguese. So that is it. I've talked a lot. Hopefully this is useful. Um, Make sure to check out your Super Batata. Check out Memorize the app. It's Memorize with an S and without the O. So it's just Memorize. Orange just has that word in the logo. Great phone app, great website, really good. Then there's Practice Portuguese. Mm, yeah, practice Portuguese, and I'll link to all of these in the description. And then also, of course, you're looking at Google Translate and make sure you know which dialect of Portuguese you're learning. So yeah, that's it. Until next time.